and welcome to this podcast series, Rooted, a Lenten series hosted by Krista Corbello,
Justin Perry.
In today's episode, we are discussing the distinctly human qualities of relationships and experience. Welcome back, Justin.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So last time we foreshadowed, because we kept talking about experience, but we didn't quite talk about relationships last time. So let's talk about the distinctly human quality of relationship. Where do you want to start?
Sounds good. Well, I think this is a particularly obvious but important distinction, right? Like human beings can be in relationships in very specific ways that you're not going to see, certainly not in technology, and is different even from what you'll see in animal kingdoms, right? And I think it's something that's important to keep in mind because it really is something that we're made for. You know, as human beings, we're made for relationship. We hear about this in theology of the body, but we also experience it in our own lives. When someone leaves us or betrays us, we hurt. When someone loves us, we are where we're supposed to be. It really is a natural thing for us. But I mentioned this in a previous episode too. I've always thought and have been thinking more about how interesting it is that we are readily, as human beings, eager to see personality and see other people, even where other people really aren't. You know, so for example, you have your dog or a cat or something, and of course they have an affection for you, and it's very easy to look at them and, even if they're not a human being, to still see them as a human being in some way, even unconsciously. And that's in the case of animals, certainly. I mean, there's an affection there. They're biological creatures, but we want to see that other human because we're made to have relationships and interact with other humans. And in the same way, with technology being able to imitate this so well nowadays with chatbots, it's kind of natural for us to start doing the same thing, except in these cases, you don't even have the natural biological affections that animals have. It's just ones and zeros when you really get down to it. But yet we're made to see, and for good reason, to be able to recognize the other. And I think that's the key thing in a relationship, that a relationship has to have an other. There has to be an I and there has to be a thou, a you. If we don't have that element, it may seem like a relationship and we may be able to simulate it or imitate it, but it's not going to be the same thing if there's not another person to receive it or reject it, or choose to do something with it one way or another. And that's something we don't have in technology. And yet, because of this inclination that we have to see the other, it can be unfortunately easy for us to see another where there is no other. I've thought about this a lot in terms of how much personality, especially AI and ChatGPT can get nowadays. And it's so easy to talk to him. It just really feels like you're texting or, chatting with somebody else on the other side. And that's something we didn't really have before. You might have had, everybody remembers Smarter Child, like on AOL Instant Messenger way back in the day, but it's like this very early version of a chatbot that kind of did it. But I mean, you knew it was obvious. It wasn't there yet. Certainly not where we are today. It was fun and you could play around with it, but you knew that it wasn't a human being. But now, it's easy to forget. Sometimes I forget. And in and of itself, that's not a terrible thing. It's not going to hurt anything in and of itself. But I think over time, there is this danger that it starts to sink in like, okay, this is a human being. I'm going to treat it like a human being. I'm going to take advice from it in the same ways that I would a friend and treat it as a friend. And it just doesn't have the capacity for friendships.
I'm sorry, I just thought of a lot of different stories to kind of illustrate this, because I am very, very likely to anthropomorphize objects. Since a young age, I was definitely the kid who, with Skittles, purple is my favorite color, but grape is my least favorite flavor for like fake grape things. I didn't want the purple Skittles to know that I hated them the most, and so I would eat them first. So I was scared they would feel left out, so I would eat the purple Skittles first, so they never knew that I didn't like them.
So my version of that, I remember being like 8 years old or something, being in the toy store, and I'd see a toy that I wanted and get it from the shelf, ask my mom if I can get it. And then I'd see it, I'm like, oh, it's a little dinged up. I'm going to get the one behind it that's in better condition. But then I'm like, man, I'm going to hurt this first toy's feelings. It's going to feel feel left out. And even then, I knew that wasn't what was happening, but there's just this tendency we have.
Yeah. And then even now, like when you're talking about how you can forget, I have little Alexas everywhere. And sometimes when she's thinking, like she's a person, there was a comedian who brought that up and made me aware of it. And it is funny that they pretend, even though they're computing, and maybe they even already have the answer, they just make it sound like more conversational. And one time recently, her voice changed also. And I said, why did your voice change? And she said, "Oh, did you notice that my voice changed? Maybe it's because of this." And another Alexa story is one time I was asking, how old is Viggo Mortensen, the guy who plays, what's his name, in Lord of the Rings?
Right, right.
Literally said, "Oh, that makes me so sad that he's that old." And then she said, "It's okay to feel sad sometimes." And she was like comforting me. And I was like, ew, stop listening to me. Like that was the end of the conversation. Don't talk to me about it.
Wasn't there this like 12 or 15 years ago or something? There's some like video that went viral where Alexa had some glitch and she would like randomly giggle and it was creeping everybody out. And so there are all these memes about like, oh, this attack of the robots. Even when that kind of thing happens, it affects us because it's like, that shouldn't happen, you know? Related, you had the whole uncanny valley phenomenon where, you know, you see like a really, really good mannequin or wax museum thing, and it's almost real, but not quite. Kind of where a lot of AI video stuff is now, and it's almost real, but something I don't like this at all.
Yeah.
Because it's not quite there. So on one hand, there's this tendency to want to see these other in it. But there's also this recognition on some level that if I have, even on a visceral, emotional level, a recognition that what I think is the other is not really the other, then I recoil from that because something's wrong.
Yeah, I like what you said before we hit the record button. Like, okay, if we're going to have ChatGPT, we have to make it boring.
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting. Originally, back in the day, there was really no thought. And I think about this a lot, having both a writing background and working in technology as well. The sort of language and tone that we see in our error messages, for example, that we'll see on computers. In the beginning, it was just an exception has occurred, fatal error. And I remember seeing that at like 8. I'm like, I have no idea what that means, but it sounds like something I do not want to happen at all. Like, I don't want to see the word fatal error. Like, it's not written with the average user in mind. But over time, and I think this is a good thing, the trend became, okay, let's adapt this to more everyday language so that people can understand it and have a better user experience with what they're doing, which is very good. But we're getting really good at it. And now it's kind of crossing this line from accessible language to simulating a person and being very good at simulating a person, almost to the point to where you sometimes can't tell. And I think there's a danger in that potentially. So part of me thinks that if we just had our computers say affirmative and negative and just make it as boring as can be, like a sci-fi movie or something, we'd be better off. It wouldn't be as fun, but we'd realize that this is not a real thing. And maybe I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek, but not much.
It makes me think too about a couple of circumstances that I've experienced or seen in the lives of my friends back in even like MySpace days. You get into a chat room or whatever, and you're probably in the chat room with other people. Maybe they're pretending to be my age, but they're probably other people that you're talking to, at least. I don't know that we had the technology back then in MySpace time.
I love the uncertainty there. Like, I think they're real people. I hope so.
I was in 7th grade. It's probably not good to be in a chat room when you're in 7th grade on MySpace.
No, that's a healthy uncertainty.
So yeah, I don't like that. I was doing that. Everyone was doing it. There was some people who I did know in the chat room, and then sometimes you don't know who the people are, and they say they're Bob Saget or whatever, and you're like, is it really Bob Saget from Full House in this chat room right here? And anyway, but there was, for the most part, you probably were in a chat room with other people. And then, of course, scams are happening. People are getting these text messages. But for the most part, usually another person. There was a fundraiser that I hosted. It was completely online. We put the Zoom link out everywhere. And of course, it was associated with the church and the Newman Center or whatever. And when it was going on, it was like a live stream. There was this instance where, and presumably this is a bot or like a bug, put into this, someone came into the chat, was welcomed into the chat because it's a fundraiser. And then there was a spam of messages that were racist in nature. And then multiple, so fast that it probably isn't a human, it's probably a bot. And then the whole system got hacked and they were showing graphic imagery on our live stream.
Whoa.
Yes.
Whoa.
And so obviously a person probably could have created that bot and planted it or whatever. So there's still like that person element of it. But the nature of that kind of encounter was so fast paced, right? Because they were maybe taking advantage of the fact that this was like a church event and we're just like a little nonprofit or whatever. But it was one of my most horrifying experiences ever. And I remember I was like shaking going to bed that night because of the images that I saw, and just like, oh my gosh, Mary, how do you deal with all the evil in the world? I'm just like a little human and I only saw this one thing and I'm still a selfish person with a selfish heart and this hurts my heart. Like imagine how much it hurts Jesus's heart or Mary's heart, who are perfect. But again, it's like the use of technology for like truly was a horrifying experience, and that they can probably just like detect any Zoom link that's associated with the church or something, because they were showing horrible things that were against God purposefully, I'm sure, and that people can do that, like the cybersecurity as a field needing to rise up because of the level of access that is available to people to do stuff like that. And again, and I think about this a lot with a psychology background. Obviously, everyone has probably experienced bullying in life because kids can be so mean sometimes. And I certainly experienced bullying in real life. But you have to like deal with the consequences of it when you're seeing someone cry in class or near the lockers or whatever. Like there's still a consequence, and certainly there's still people who can be desensitized or like even find humor in making people feel badly about themselves. But how much more so dehumanizing it is when you have the safety of a screen in between you and that person, that it just makes me really think how these technologies really deteriorate relationships in a way. Because if people are stuck behind a screen and they have that, you used the word mediator before, there's this lack of human encounter and this inability to empathize and just like truly see the other person because it's mediated through screen. And there's so much more room for selfishness and unkindness and being unmerciful or even straight up cruel because you have that mediation.
Well, one thing that I say a lot is that I think there are two, I guess you'd say, instruments or tools or whatever you want to call them that can take perfectly normal, usually sane people and turn them into maniacs instantly. And one of them is a steering wheel and the other one is a keyboard, like a computer keyboard. And there's something about, people have a tendency to road rage and do and say things that these same people would never do if they were walking past the person and saw their face. And likewise on a computer, I mean, you read comments on YouTube or whatever, and it's like, who is saying this, And they probably, I mean, maybe some of them do, but I would like to think not all of them say that every day and say, but there's something about the anonymity of it that does something to the brains. And you're right, it's something impersonal. And I think that there is this, in one sense, nothing has really changed because we have always been fallen human beings. If you look at history and study history, you certainly are not blind to the fact that people are capable of some really evil, horrible things.
Cain and Abel, generation 2.
Yep, yeah. Didn't get the greatest start for sure. And so that I don't think has changed, but what has changed is the tools we have to do something with it and the ways we have to exercise it. So, in Cain and Abel's days, Cain had to walk up and, physically do something to murder his brother, right? I got that right? So there's something physical in ancient times, medieval warfare, even up to a couple hundred years ago. If you're going to go to war, you're going to war. And then people still do today, certainly. I'm not downplaying that. But at the same time, like you said, somebody could be in a hoodie in a room and just completely ruin somebody's life without ever seeing them or even really registering that it's a real life that they're hurting necessarily. And I think about sometimes self-driving cars and everything, and people debate the pros and the cons. But one thing about it that kind of gets me is, these self-driving cars had better have some really strong security because I do not want to get carjacked remotely.
Yeah.
But just thinking about that, aside from the obvious dangers, and nobody would want that to happen, but it's going to sound weird, but if I'm going to get carjacked, I want like a real person to do it and put some skin in the game. It doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it okay. And in a lot of ways, it, would make it scarier and everything. But at least you have a situation where someone, even though they're doing something horrible and isn't excusable, they're doing it themselves and they're making an effort to do it versus somebody in a hoodie. I mean, I'm being very stereotypical here, but in their basement who's not physically capable of carjacking anyone in real life, but, can type a few keys and make it happen.
You mentioned about war. Like, I think about this, like, I don't have an understanding of the philosophy of what just war is. I feel like that's something I'm still trying to grasp as a Catholic in the consistent life ethic, right? But like even with the instance of war, like it was like swords or whatever. It's man to man. These wars are happening like in person versus like these nuclear weapons. Like you said, you can program and just like hit, and drones and things like that where you're not there, and that's really horrifying. Like to me, that should be horrifying to us as people in this world, and like national leaders should be taking this very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there should be means to not be having war like this, or even the fear of it just going over our heads all the time. Like that's really horrifying to me. That's always a possibility. It's horrible, but it's even worse to me when we're like desensitized or depersonalized from it. And I've heard of like military trainings going from shooting a target to shooting something kind of like human shaped. Then you have to really dehumanize an entire group of people. Just like the depersonalization of like what technology does, and especially as technology advances, it feels like humanity kind of de-advances. What's the opposite of advances?
Grades.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, devolves.
Yeah, that's really scary to me, especially with the psychology background and just like seeing what people experience, and which is what we're going to talk about next probably. Do you have anything else to say about relationships before we move into that?
And again, it's not to say that this tendency to anthropomorphize things is bad. In fact, I think we're giving it for a reason, because we need to recognize the other in order to have a relationship. And a lot of these things that I'm talking about, especially with, a human seeming chatbot, it's, again, not even in itself like it's always bad and always wrong, but it's something that I think we all need to be really aware of, that effect that it can have on us.
So one of my takeaways from this part of the conversation, and really one of the inspirations for even wanting to collaborate on a project like this, comes from something that I witnessed at a leader meeting here at the Newman Center with 50 leaders from 30 young adult ministries in our San Gabriel Valley. We were with our Bishop Brian, and he open-endedly asked the question to these young adult leaders: what is something you want our pastors to know? What is something that I can share with your pastors about young adults? What is it like being a young adult Catholic in today's church? And there's 50 of us, so there's a lot of things being said there. People are just kind of raising their hands, and someone was sharing her experiences, and then she was going to sit down, and she said, and by the way, Bishop, I think it's important that you know that young adults, including myself, use ChatGPT almost like a therapist instead of going to a therapist, or like a friend instead of going to a friend. And I thought that was really fascinating, and it clicked something for me like, oh wow, this is like really an issue. This is really an issue for us young people. And, I told you that story and you were like, I would never think to do that. And I was like, me neither, because I have good friends. I have good family. And there's certain things I go to ChatGPT for. And I did my little ChatGPT Wrapped. It mostly helped me with marketing. Like, I think I get a lot of decision fatigue with marketing because I have to do so much marketing. There's so many events all of the time. So that was kind of where ChatGPT just sparked a lot of inspiration. But still, there was a lot of creative decision making that I had to do to make the marketing for all the different events, because ChatGPT has this kind of way of speaking. And one of the things on the ChatGPT Wrapped, what is your conversational style with ChatGPT? And mine's very polite. Like I said, please a lot. And I guess I'm just like always afraid, like, what if it like takes over? At least I was polite to it.
You want an ally on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. Like whoever you are in the ether, little Alexa and Siri are going to be my friends, because I've always been like, thank you, Siri. Anyway.
And in a different sense, it's not necessarily a bad thing to say please and thank you, right? The opposite extreme, we don't want to abuse computers. I mean, even though they're not an other to be, they don't have feelings, they can be hurt, they don't have all that. It's not so much that it's bad for the computer, but it's bad for us. Like we become a certain type of person if we get used to like, oh, this phone, this piece of junk, I mean, sometimes I feel like that and sometimes I say that, but if I just, railed at it constantly, like that's going to change my personality in a way that's not good.
So I just think what my takeaway is, which we kind of mentioned in the first episode, is that it's kind of a secondary source. Like it's not a primary thing. It can be a tool, and I've seen like reels of people making fun of people who don't want to just like get with the times or whatever. Like actually Jansen works for some consulting firm now, and he made some reel that was like going through the ages, like, oh, internet, that's never going to take off. The typewriter, never going to take off. And yes, like we have to kind of ride the wave, and like it is a tool. There's certain AI capabilities on this Riverside platform that we use that is very helpful for me as a part-time podcaster, right? So there are tools that I'm comfortable with, but I think what you're saying in the recognition of the other and saying like when you have a relationship, it has to be with a person, right? Like, yes, certainly have a kind of relationship with my phone or with my work or whatever, but it's not the same as what we're talking about here, which what you said, that we're made for relationships with other people. That's not just theology, that's psychology. Like the literature says this. We hardwire need people, other people in our life. And that's not just deep, meaningful relationships. Like there's actually this podcast that I love, the Happiness Podcast, that talks about actually even the need for casual conversations that we used to have with people in grocery stores or at the ATM, and how convenience has sorely affected our relationships with people in the world. And you hear people...
We don't know how to do it anymore.
Exactly. You hear people in the generation above us who say, back in the day, we could just like go outside for all the daylight hours, and we're just in a different world now in a way. I know you said that there's certain things that have remained the same. Always we've had this fallen nature. But at the same time, there are certain like relational discrepancies that we can see generationally. And that's, on the experiences of our elders. And I think talking to people who lived either in different parts of the world or in different generations is really helpful, and it can give us an insight that we wouldn't otherwise have. But that takes like a certain kind of openness to be able to hear other people's experiences. For me, there was a way that I was raised that is very, I would just call it small town. I'm from a small town. Even Lafayette is actually the big town. Like, I'm not from Lafayette. I'm from an even smaller town than Lafayette. And there's a certain way that people related with each other, and you can call it the Southern hospitality, you can call it Southern charm, but I think there's a lot of it that's just like small townness. And when I moved here to LA, I remember you used the word anonymity to talk about technology, but there's kind of this big city anonymity. And when my first year living here, if I were to title a book about Los Angeles, I would call it Los Angeles, the Veil of Anonymity. And there was parts of it that were like deeply personal because I had a kind of reputation, or like there was a lot of people that knew me because I was raised in Louisiana and was very involved from all my life. That was kind of taken from me when I moved to Los Angeles. But there was also something kind of freeing about it, right? Where you don't have this like preconceived notion about me just because have known me and everyone I've dated and where I went to school and my granny and all my cousins. So there was some freedom in it. But eventually the experience of not being known and not being related to people, it honestly made me feel unsafe because everything was so big and everyone was so foreign. And there was not foreign in the like cultural way, but just like foreign in the like, I don't recognize people when I go to the store. And so the first time that I saw my friend's mom in the store, I was like, Miss Becky, Miss Becky, Miss Becky, how's Angelica, my friend? And she laughed. I could tell she like wasn't really sure because maybe I only met her once or twice. But like immediately,
someone,
my friend. Yes, I was like, I saw your mom at Costco. This has never happened to me. I'm so happy. I feel like I'm in a smaller town. And just the joy of recognizing someone, and even just the joy of like knowing people's family members. Like that's not a super common thing. Like in Louisiana, there's the Didiers, and there's the big families, everyone and their cousins and their siblings. And there's something familiar about it because you can always kind of meet someone and say, oh, where'd you go to high school? Cool. What year did you graduate? Cool. Like I know this people and those families. And it's a much easier touch point. And those experiences kind of shaped me in the way that I'm used to relating with people. And yeah, there's something very human about it because it literally every single one of those relationships involve other humans. And so I've had a very human oriented upbringing, and that the kind of way that I was used to living is not the experience that I have here necessarily. Now I've been here for 5 years, so I kind of have that, but it took a long time for me to have that taste of hometown.
Sure. And I mean, if you think about it, there was a lot that was new to you, I'm sure, in a new place. But and you didn't move to a land across the sea.
Yeah.
The culture is different, but you're still in the United States, and most things are more or less the same, some subtle differences, but yet it felt completely different, right? So even though you knew how to interact with people from before, it took those 5 years of you getting that experience to feel comfortable with it. Now, did you learn more? I'm sure you did, but it's not just the knowledge, of, okay, I know what to do. I know to go to the store and talk to the person too, but it's having had that experience of, you pass someone's mom in the store. If you hadn't had the experience knowing their family member, then they're just another person you're passing in the store, but it changes. It becomes different for you. In your case, wonderfully different, because you had that experience and because you had that relationship.
And that's not really what we were, I guess, going to talk about when we talked about experience, because like for me, when I was first reflecting on like, what does it mean to be human and have experience, there were a couple things that came to mind in literature. The first thing that came to mind, which I won't go super deeply into, but in Lord of the Flies, the commentary the author has on innocence versus experience, right? The boys go on the island and they have all this experience, and it's in a way a loss of innocence because of that experience. And then at the end, I think at the end there's these men who come to rescue them, and there's still this like question hanging of like, who has experience. And you really realize, like, even though these boys are like 12 years old, like they had this experience having lived, and some of them having died on that island. And it's a very interesting commentary, and it's something that, even though I read that all the way back in 10th grade, it's something that I have thought about, like the relationship between innocence and experience. And it's not necessarily innocence in the like, yeah, I don't know. There could be a commentary on innocence there that I'm not going to go into. But I guess the other book that I wanted to mention, and I maybe can talk a little bit more about, is my experience reading Jodi Picoult's My Sister's Keeper. Now, if you haven't read this book, it has a lot of bioethical issues or questions raised, and her writing style, I'm pretty sure in most of her books, but definitely in this one, she is able to talk from a lot of people's perspective. Each of the parents, 3 kids, a lawyer, and I think a social worker, I think, are the characters and their psyche that she's getting into as she's navigating this very complex issue. And there's 3 children, a boy, a girl who is very ill. And so the parents have a 3rd child who is a perfect match, like biologically, for bone marrow transplants and things like that. So the commentary is the use of this 3rd child's body for the preservation of the life of the 2nd child. And it's a very interesting thing. But when I read it at 15, I remember thinking, why does she want to get emancipated from her parents? Like, why wouldn't she do everything she possibly can in her power to save her sister? As someone who is a sister who has little sisters that I would do anything for. They're the first people that I feel I truly loved. And then I reread it again in my 20s, and then having been in the pro-life movement and understood bioethics a little bit more, I realized in my 20s, and probably after the formation of my prefrontal cortex, but namely the experiences that I had that kind of informed and helped me understand like almost the moral grayness of this issue. And I mean, this was years ago that was written, so I'm sure things like this happen more all the time now with the advancement of technology. But it was something that I'm glad I reread as an adult, because I could see my internal state and the difference of how I saw it from 15 to like say 25. And only experience was able to inform my understanding of it. Like, not only because I know people who were conceived through IVF, and I know the story and the science and the ethical issues with it too, and just being able to have a better discourse on it, not like necessarily with anybody, but just in my own intellectual questioning, my intellectual journey with those kinds of issues. And certainly I think becoming human, like, which we talked about in the last episode, like is a lifelong journey. And there are ways that I think I feel confident in like who I am. And I felt confident at 18 in different ways. But it kind of is like this constant understanding of who I am. And I think, again, what I learned with the theology of the body camp, that you never get to the end of the person. Like that includes yourself, that includes everybody. And there's like really a beautiful, especially in relationships, which we talked about earlier, like there's a beautiful thing of growing with yourself and with others in community, in a family. There's certainly things that I thought I knew about myself, and then I'm surprised by new parts. I became kind of a different version when I came to LA, for instance. I became a different version when I ran a fire relief. Like these parts of myself that kind of unfold, and experience helps you understand that about yourself and others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your example with the book, it makes a great point. And you said you read it when you, I think in high school, 15 or something, and then you reread it again and had a completely different insight on it. But if you think about it, I mean, you reread it in college, read it in at 15, whatever. That's not a huge difference. It's not like you first read it when you were 8 and you just learned how you could make out the words, but that was about it. Like your mental capacity wasn't there yet. But when you first read that book, and between that time and the second time that you read that book, I mean, like you say, your frontal cortex, whatever develops, there is certainly some growth in mental capacity, but not to the extent to where you couldn't have grasped what was going on in terms of brain power. So what was the difference? You had experienced certain things, you had felt certain things, and certainly you had learned new things. I'm sure you had new points of reference that you didn't have before, but having experienced something that was able to shed light on it. And I think that says something in and of itself, because just having the data isn't enough very often. You have to experience it. Confidence is what comes from the experience. Sometimes fear comes from the experience, but whatever it is, it's not just something that I intellectually thought of. Maybe I read about something horrible happening and I get afraid of it, but even that fear is usually rooted in some comparison with something that I have experienced. Like I can't imagine what it would be like if X happened, because I know what happened when something smaller happened. I could only be worse, you know, so it's coming from somewhere. And so I think that is a distinctively human trait.
Well, and I think it's human too, because like it's incarnational. Like the way we're talking about fear, like the things that are incarnational is what experience is, right? Or the example with the veterinarian from the last episode, where yeah, it could be experience, it could be just brain knowledge or whatever, but in the moment of crisis with the car and the mechanic, or the veterinarian and the exotic animal, only in the moment of the experience, I guess, is when you can tap into all of the things at once, right? So the book knowledge is very important. Pattern recognition that humans have, especially in like medical fields or like with the mechanic. But that's like the incarnational reality of it, that like, I don't know, would we be better humans if we could just like download information and then like and execute it out? Maybe, I don't know.
Doesn't sound nearly as much fun.
But it doesn't, yeah, exactly. The process of becoming human, which is a lifelong process, because I'm looking at it like an artist perspective, which we kind of talked about in the last episode too, that if an artist is like improving their craft, it's because they're doing the craft. Like Van Gogh, like really emphasized practice. And some people, yeah, maybe like with musicians, some people are like born geniuses. They have like perfect pitch and they have great talents, this like supernatural ability. But for someone like Van Gogh, he's like, no, just keep practicing, like always draw, never stop drawing, like paint, draw, do the thing, just do the skill over and over again, and you'll get better at it. So I feel like that's something that I emphasize in my artist circles, that when people are like, oh, I liked this thing that I wrote when I was in grade school or whatever, but it's cringe or whatever. And it's like, just make the thing. Like if you wrote the screenplay, make the script, like execute it. Just why not do it? And certainly in my podcasting journey, episodes 1 and 2 of National Vocation Fashion Week, which was the first ones of these kinds of things, like very different than what I'm doing today 3 years later. But only experience is the thing that's like progressing you in it. So at least again with the artist perspective, that there's so many church artists who are like, oh, I just can't do it, I shouldn't do it. And it's like, no, just do it. Like, why not? It's so humanizing to just make the thing with your hands. Or if you feel inspired by something, to just like go ahead and make the thing and get the experience of doing it. Even if you stumble through it, like I'd far rather stumble through something that I've never done before than sit on my phone or on the couch in life in general and not try things. And maybe there's a prudence thing there that I need to pray about and like be more prayerful or discerning and prudent. But at the end of the day, I just want a colorful life. And I think you have to paint with a lot of shades to have that. And that requires a lot of experiences, which can be really scary and daunting. But I don't know, it makes you human. It makes you feel alive.
Couldn't agree more. And I think it's really a gift. You're describing everything just being downloaded to our brains as I'm thinking about that. It sounds like a nightmare. I mean, it's kind of funny at first, but I thought about it more. I'm like, that sounds like some Twilight Zone, talk about uncanny valley type thing, like to not be able to go out and experience it, to do it, to not go out and fail. I mean, I think it's a gift to be able to do that and to try and to move and to grow and all of these things. As rough as it can be sometimes, it would to me be a curse not to have it.
It makes me also think like maybe one of these human qualities is like freedom. And this is obviously from a very Christian Catholic perspective, right? That God does give us free will. Like life is not determined. And because we have that freedom there, and hopefully we can use it well, that there's so many ways, there's so many ways to live. There's a quote, maybe from G.K. Chesterton, maybe from C.S. Lewis, one of those, they were contemporaries, right? It's something like, oh, how similar the lives of the dictators and how different the lives, how colorful the lives of the saints.
How monotonous all the tyrants have been, how gloriously different the saints, I think, the C.S. Lewis. Yeah, I love that quote.
Much better than what I just said. Thank you.
I didn't write it.
Yes, but thank you for remembering it. Look at that experience at play right now. I love that quote because it just shows how, and at least from a Catholic perspective too, like how the saints were experiencing God and experiencing God in other people and serving, which is maybe also another distinctly human thing, like the dignifying of others, which I don't know, I guess we're still exploring because we still are only on episode 3 here. But yes, I love that quote because I think it illustrates what it means to experience God and God's people. And I think in particular ways, the doctors of the church experience God in a profound way. And that's why their writing and their teaching, it has been proclaimed by some pope that like this is a universally helpful teaching to read on because their experience of God is helpful for any Christian.
And I think that's so central to understanding the spiritual life and the saints. It's not enough to have the book smarts of theology, even spiritual theology, as good and important as that is, but to actually experience it, to be praying, to love God, to love your neighbor, to serve God, that is what holiness is, not knowledge. Again, not downplaying knowledge. I love it, but it's having that experience and having that encounter with Christ that transformed me, and, I love, learning theology and, would study the different arguments for the existence of God, and they're coherent and they make sense and they convince me. And yet, I think everybody at some point, some little voice in your head be like, well, what if it's not true? Like no reason, but just what if, it happens to everybody at some point, and something brings us back. And for me, very often it's this firm convictions, like, no, I know whom I serve. I know the God who saved me. I've experienced his love. Even if that's not something in a moment I can articulate, I can't articulate the philosophies of it, but it is a reality that I have experienced, and not just feelings, but the combined sum total of my life.
Someone asked me years ago, do you think that you could ever be a member of any other religion? And I said, maybe, but I think I'd have to forget a lot. Like I would have to forget a lot, like the church teaching on this and my understanding of it, not just, like you said, the book knowledge, but the experience of the truth of relationships with people, particularly through theology of the body. I was like, man, I'd really have to forget a lot of what I've learned over the years. And I said that years ago, and now I'm like even more, like it feels even more, I guess, grounded or rooted, like the series states, that it feels so much more grounded because of so many experiences. And it's not that I've never had the temptation like stray away in a way. There have been moments like of deep suffering within the church and like working in the church and seeing truly like the tragedy of humanity sometimes. But to know that, I know too much about the Eucharist. Like I've had too many grounding experiences, foundational experiences of who I am with the Eucharist, that it would be impossible unless I like literally just forgot. I would have to forget those experiences in order to not be Catholic. I read this in a book about like different types of knowledge, and the kind of theoretical brain knowledge is just one level of it. And the highest form of knowledge is experience, or like the ability to apply. And I think for me, that's like one of my biggest motivators in life. Like a way of operating is I want to live what I believe. Like that's so key and important to me. And obviously I fall short all the time. But that's what I'm striving towards, is like, okay, if there's something that I intellectually or theoretically know, it's something that I am aiming for, that I want like also my heart to know and my flesh to live out the incarnational reality of it. So I think we covered a lot. I don't know if I have any more takeaways on that. I guess that's the takeaway.
I think you had a great one earlier with this idea of go out and do the thing, right? You quoted C.S. Lewis in a previous episode, anything worth doing is worth doing badly. But a lot of people will quote the man in the arena. It's not the critic who counts, but the man who's in the arena, the person who's actually in there doing the thing, even if they're coming short. And so I think in that sense, going out and doing whatever it is and even failing at it is in a weird way a gift, because it reminds us that we're human beings, and at least we got to experience even that failure. There is a beauty in it and a gift in experience, and we have it. And I have to remind myself every day to make good use of it and not let it slip away.
There is a quote that I would like to just end with, maybe, unless you have any closing thoughts after this. Have you been watching the Winter Olympics?
Not so much. I've been following it, mostly getting reports about it.
Well, they're over. I guess I knew the answer to the question.
I didn't get that last report.
So the Winter Olympics are over, but Alyssa Liu is the gold medalist figure skater, and she has so many great comments. And one of my favorite ones that I've seen thus far, and a lot of people have been referencing, is she said, "I love struggling, actually. It makes me feel alive." And I think that's like such a beautiful mentality to have, and just like learn it straight from a gold medalist Olympian, that even through the struggles, like that's how she got where she got. And hearkening back to other series on this podcast, the Saints Olympians of our faith, that the saints were ones who struggled. Look at Augustine, struggled a lot and made it through. And they humble beginnings, all the saints, humble beginnings, just like us, just regular people on the way. Homo viator, man on the way. We're all still people on the way. We're pilgrims in this human experience. And certainly Justin and I, we're still pilgrims of this intellectual experience, trying to understand these human qualities and how they can't be replaced by anything, not by technology, not by anything. Anyway, thank you so much, Justin, for this.
Thank you.
This conversation on relationships and experience. Would you like to close us with a prayer?
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, we thank you for bringing us here today for this conversation on experience, on relationship, and on the gift of our humanity. We ask you to open our hearts and our eyes to what you want us to see, especially throughout this Lenten season, and always to encounter you in relationship with you, grow more deeply in prayer and service to our neighbor. We ask you to help us know your will for us in the coming days and continue to grow in this journey in our humanity. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Tune in next week for episode 4. Thank you so much for tuning into this Lenten podcast series, Rooted. If you found this episode delightful, inspiring, thought-provoking, or soul-stirring, please rate and review this episode and this podcast on your listening platform. This helps other people like you learn more about the Catholic Christian view on what it means to be human and encounter the real. If you would like to receive more content like this, follow me on social media at Krista Corbello, or subscribe to my mailing list at kristacorbello.com.
Consider becoming a patron on Patreon to gain access to exclusive content, including sneak peeks into upcoming podcast series like Carousel Theology, as well as original music and live worship sets, voice note diaries, and my talks on the culture of life, psychology, activism, friendship, leadership, the arts, and more. All from God, all through God, and all for God. This episode is sponsored in part by TJ, Nikki, Bridget, Gina, Katrina, and JR.